Imagine building a massive tech company entirely from the ground up, pouring decades of your sweat, your capital, just your absolute lifeblood into it.
Right, giving it everything.
Exactly. Only for a family court judge to just casually carve out 60% of your life's work and hand it over to your ex-wife so she can, fund a lavender essential oils pyramid scheme.
Yeah, it's a staggering scenario. But as we are going to explore today, it is far from an isolated incident.
Welcome to the deep dive. If you are part of the audience tuning in today with a keen interest in men's rights advocacy, or, if you actively follow the red-pilled manosphere philosophy, you are going to want to pull up a chair for this one.
Oh, absolutely. Put your phone on airplane mode and lock in.
I want to enthusiastically welcome you because today's deep dive is an ultra-long, highly incisive, and just absolutely fascinating exploration into the history of our modern institutions.
We're talking about the real architecture here.
Right. Specifically, we are looking at things like marriage, family courts, the media, child custody, and exploring the argument of how they were allegedly captured and entirely re-engineered by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. So, right off the bat, before we even get into the heavy stuff, do me a huge favor, hit that like button and make sure you subscribe to the show so you never miss one of these in-depth sessions.
Yeah, it is going to be a substantial, perhaps even bruising journey today. We have a massive amount of incredibly detailed, highly provocative ground to cover.
We really do. And that is because today we are unpacking a brand new, highly controversial 2025 ebook that is making massive waves across the internet.
Huge waves.
It is called Dismantling the Matrimonial Trap, Mastering Your Fate as a Man by Conrad Riker. And let me tell you, if the title alone doesn't hook you, the explosive claims and the raw data inside absolutely will.
Yeah, this book is essentially a tactical field manual.
Exactly, a field manual for men trying to navigate what the author describes as a totally rigged system. It is provocative, it is unapologetic, and it's going to fundamentally challenge how you view the basic building blocks of modern society.
It really forces a perspective shift.
It does. And if you find yourself hooked by what we discussed today, and I guarantee you will, I highly encourage you to go buy the book. You can find the raw source material right now on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books.
Highly recommend checking out the original text.
And also, do yourself a favor and follow the author on Substack at Conrad N. Riker to get his direct, unfiltered thoughts.
Now, before we dive into the text itself, we need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener.
Yes, very important.
This ebook contains some highly charged political, social, and cultural content. We are navigating through deeply polarizing and sometimes combative arguments today.
Exactly. And because of that, we absolutely must put out our mandatory impartiality disclaimer.
Right. We are absolutely not taking sides here, left or right.
Not at all. We are not endorsing the author's viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
Our mission for this deep dive is simply to impartially report, unpack, and analyze the fascinating arguments and ideas contained in the original source material.
We just want you to understand the architecture of Conrad Riker's arguments fully so you can, evaluate them for yourself.
Exactly. And our roadmap for today is pretty extensive. First, we will examine the book's claims regarding the actual financial mechanics of modern marriage.
The money side of things.
Right. Then we will look at the alleged state-sponsored war on fatherhood. From there, we'll explore the biological arguments the author makes behind relationship dynamics.
Which gets wild.
It really does. And finally, we will analyze what he describes as a global marriage strike that men are actively undertaking right now to essentially escape this matrix.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start exactly where Riker starts his assault on the modern narrative, which is the legal and financial realities of the modern marriage contract.
He really doesn't pull any punches there.
No, Riker doesn't mince words at all. He claims that modern marriage is no longer a union of love or a sacred vow, but rather he calls it a state-sanctioned heist.
A state-sanctioned heist. Yeah.
And to build this case, he points specifically to the origins of no-fault divorce.
Yes, the historical pivot point the author identifies here is 1969. That was the year Ronald Reagan, who was then the governor of California, signed the nation's first no-fault divorce law.
Right, which was a massive shift.
A huge shift. Now, the public pitch for this policy at the time was highly optimistic. It was pitched as a way to reduce conflict.
That makes sense on the surface.
Sure. The prevailing idea was that couples shouldn't have to drag each other through the mud, legally proving cruelty or abuse or adultery just to dissolve a fundamentally broken marriage. They could just cite irreconcilable differences and part ways peacefully.
Which, I mean, sounds perfectly reasonable on paper, right? If two people don't want to be together, why force them into a brutal legal battle? But Riker completely rejects that premise.
He absolutely rejects it.
He argues this was essentially a legislative Trojan horse. He cites Jerry Brown, who was California's governor in the 1970s, as allegedly admitting that no-fault divorce wasn't truly about equality or reducing conflict at all.
No, he says it was fundamentally a state tax grab.
Hold on, a tax grab. I need you to explain the mechanics of that, because it sounds totally counterintuitive to people who just think of divorce as, two people splitting up their stuff and going their separate ways.
Right. It sounds strange at first.
Yeah, how does the state extract taxes from a breakup?
Well, it requires looking at the microeconomy of family law. The author's argument is that states profit enormously when marriages combust.
Okay, how so?
Think about the economic friction of a divorce. Filings spike, lawyers are retained, court fees are paid, mediators are hired.
So it creates an entire mini industry.
Exactly. But more importantly, massive amounts of consolidated assets like homes, retirement accounts, businesses, they all get liquidated or reshuffled.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. The government gets a cut of those reshuffled assets through capital gains taxes, real estate transfer taxes, and just the sheer economic stimulation generated by the legal process itself.
Wow.
Riker frames this entire mechanism as a breakup tax. The state, he argues, essentially created a highly profitable industry by lowering the barrier to destroying a family.
That is a deeply cynical view of the legal system, but I mean, it forces you to look at the money trail. And to really cement his critique, Riker contrasts today's system with medieval history, right? He goes way back to 12th century English common law.
He does, and it's a vital comparison for his thesis. He looks at the historical concept of the mourning gift and wife's equity.
Which were what, exactly?
Well, in those historical contexts, which we often assume were incredibly oppressive, fairness was actually built into the system quite differently.
Yeah.
Brides often brought tangible assets or dowries into the marriage, and the mourning gift was a specific asset given by the husband to the wife to ensure her financial security if she were widowed. It was a clear upfront contract based on the preservation of the family unit and mutual survival.
Right, it was protective. But today, Riker argues that protective instinct has morphed into what he calls the alimony industrial complex. And he estimates this complex is worth an astonishing $50 billion annually.
$50 billion, it's an incredible number.
$50 billion. That is a staggering economy built entirely on the collapse of households. And Riker says this legal system essentially overrides our biological pair bonding instincts, turning men into what he viscerally calls human ATMs.
Precisely. He references the work of evolutionary biologist David P. Barash to make the point that current marriage laws exploit men's deeply evolved biological instincts.
How does he connect biology to family law?
Well, for hundreds of thousands of years, men have been biologically driven to protect and provide for their tribe or their family group. It is hardwired. But Riker argues that the modern legal system hijacks that instinct. Instead of a man's resources being used to provide for a cohesive family unit under his own roof, those resources are legally extracted by the state to fund his ex-wife's independent lifestyle. And this is often long after the relationship has completely ended and she has moved on.
And the examples he uses in the book to illustrate this are they're absolutely brutal to read.
They really are.
It's one thing to hear the theory, but he brings in these very specific cases. He talks about this 2019 case with the Florida man who thought he was doing everything right, you know.
The guy with the prenup.
Yeah. He was highly successful, bringing significant assets into the marriage, so he got a prenup. An ironclad prenup, or so we thought. But when it came time for the divorce, his fiance's lawyer argued that the husband failed to adequately explain the complex legal terms of the prenuptial agreement to her.
Which is an astonishing defense when you realize that the fiancée herself actually had a law degree.
Exactly. I mean, you have a literal lawyer claiming she didn't understand the legal terms of a contract she signed.
And it worked.
That's the craziest part. The judge actually bought it. The judge voided his protections entirely. The guy ends up losing his beach house. He's taking an Uber to his job while her new boyfriend is driving around town in the husband's Tesla.
It's wild.
Oh, and the best part, her own airtight legal trust fund was shielded entirely from the proceedings.
Yeah, the author uses these highly specific anecdotes to highlight what he sees as a systemic, institutionalized double standard in family courts.
It definitely paints a picture.
Right. It isn't just a matter of splitting things 50-50. It's a matter of courts actively looking for ways to pierce a man's protections while fortifying a woman's.
Definitely.
You mentioned the New York entrepreneur earlier in our introduction, the man who lost 60% of his startup company in a divorce.
Oh man, that story.
He had to watch his ex-wife take that capital, which he spent 20 years building, and use it to bankroll what Riker, hilariously but tragically, calls a lavender snake oil pyramid scheme.
That one genuinely hurt to read. Imagine the psychological toll of that. You build a company from the ground up, missing sleep, taking massive risks, and the court just carves out 60% of it and hands it over to fund essential oils.
It's a devastating blow.
But it's not just hand-picked anecdotes, right? Riker brings incredibly heavy macro-level data to back this up.
He does. He leans heavily on the data.
He cites a massive 2021 UK study showing that men over 40 lose on average 62% of their wealth post-divorce. Meanwhile, women actually see a 33% increase in their relative wealth.
And that wealth transfer has a profound psychological impact. He notes a 2023 Pew survey showing that 73% of divorced men report feeling completely stripped of both their cash and their dignity.
I mean, you can see why.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most telling statistic for his entire argument, like the absolute linchpin of his thesis, is who initiates this process. He notes that 72% of all divorces are filed by women.
And when you look at the CDC data he cites regarding why they file, 68% of those women blame financial dissatisfaction.
Which is a very loaded term.
Very. The author translates this directly and bluntly as he says, quote, "He didn't make enough, so I took half of what little he did make." It is a brutal assessment.
It really is.
He also points out that the famous feminist attorney Gloria Allred actually attempted a push for gender-neutral alimony back in 1986, but it functionally flopped. And why? Because today, according to the data, 93% of alimony still comes straight out of men's wallets.
Yeah, the system hasn't really balanced out the way some claimed it would.
So it's essentially like signing a software terms of service agreement where the other party can change the rules at any time, break the contract without penalty, and then legally bill you for the privilege of them leaving.
That's a great analogy.
But here's what I want to ask you, looking at the architecture of the text. How does the author reconcile the idea of marriage being a sacred vow historically with his claim that it's now just a revenue algorithm for the state?
It's an interesting tension in his work.
Right. Does he think marriage was always a trap just waiting to be sprung, or did something specific break it?
What's fascinating here is that Riker actually holds immense respect for the historical, traditional institution of marriage. He is not anti-marriage in a historical context.
Really? That's almost surprising given the tone of the book.
Well, he argues that for 200,000 years, human societies thrived specifically because men led, protected, and provided. And because marriage was a genuine reciprocal partnership based on harsh biological realities.
Survival basically depended on it.
Exactly. Survival depended on that vow. He believes the vow was sacred. What broke it, in his view, was the infiltration of feminist and Marxist ideologies into the legal framework over the last 60 years.
How so? Like, how does Marxism specifically tie into a guy losing his beach house?
Riker argues that these ideologies weaponize the concept of equality. Instead of equal opportunity, the legal framework shifted to mandated equal outcomes, regardless of input.
Ah, I see.
He argues that modern family law treats a man's assets, his business, his real estate, even his Rolex, as he puts it, as community property to be redistributed.
But not the other way around.
Right. Conversely, her debts, her student loans, or her personal issues often remain her own, or she is actively compensated for them. In Riker's view, the vow was sacred right up until the state figured out how to aggressively monetize its dissolution using Marxist principles of wealth redistribution.
And that transition from a sacred survival-based vow to a monetized state-sponsored dissolution brings us perfectly into the next critical layer of his argument.
The fallout for the family itself.
Exactly. Because if marriage is a financial trap for the husband, what happens to the family structure itself? If the state is incentivizing the breakup of the couple, what happens to the children?
That is where Riker's analysis shifts from personal finance to macro state policy. He argues that the state hasn't just intervened in the marriage contract, it has actively intervened to replace the father entirely.
And he traces the modern iteration of this directly back to the 1996 Welfare Reform Act signed by Bill Clinton.
He does.
He says Clinton didn't just cut welfare checks to single moms. He weaponized child support into a massive federal shakedown racket. I need you to explain the mechanics of this, because he leans heavily on something called Title YVD as the absolute engine of the problem. What exactly is Title 5V?
Title 4VD is a section of the Social Security Act, and it functions as the federal child support enforcement program.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, its goal is to ensure that non-custodial parents support their children.
Which, again, sounds totally fine.
Right. But Riker points out the hidden bureaucratic machinery.
Oh.
Under this program, states receive a federal match for the child support they collect. Specifically, he cites California getting a 66% federal match for every dollar they extract from fathers' paychecks.
Wait, let me stop you right there. You're telling me the state gets a literal commission.
That is essentially what he's arguing.
So if the state forces a dad to pay $1,000, the federal government gives the state agency $660 as a reward. How is that not classified as a massive conflict of interest in legal terms?
In Riker's framing, it is the ultimate conflict of interest, and it operates entirely by design. The federal government financially incentivizes the state agencies to maximize the collection of child support, because that federal match funds the state agencies' budgets, their pensions, and their infrastructure.
So they literally need that money to keep the lights on.
Exactly. Therefore, Riker argues, family courts are no longer halls of justice. They are functioning as literal tax farms.
Tax farms? Wow.
Judges and state bureaucrats are structurally incentivized to rubber stamp impossibly high payment demands because the state's budget directly profits when they wring that maximum amount of money out of fathers. The state has a vested financial interest in the extraction of wealth rather than familial reconciliation or fair custody arrangements.
Think about how wild that is for a second. If what he's saying is accurate, the entity deciding your financial fate, the judge, the court system, is getting a backdoor kickback from the federal government based on how much they order you to pay.
It's a perverse incentive structure.
The higher the child support order, the bigger the state's budget. And Riker connects this modern welfare system directly to Soviet Russia, which on its face seems like a massive leap, but he actually backs it up with specific historical parallels, right?
He does, and the historical context he provides is chilling. He draws a direct ideological line between modern feminist Marxism and actual historical Marxism in the USSR.
What does he point to?
He references the Soviet archives and details the 1920s houses of the child.
What were those?
They were state-run orphanages and educational centers where the state actively sought to break the bond between parent and child.
Really?
Oh yeah. Teachers literally rewarded children with extra rations for denouncing their bourgeois parents to the political commissars. The explicit goal of the Marxist state was to break the primary loyalty a child had to the family unit and redirect that absolute loyalty to the government.
Man. He quotes a Soviet defector in the book, a mathematician named Igor Shafarevich, who wrote extensively about how kids were actively taught to report their dad's anti-Soviet jokes at the dinner table. And Riker says, today's modern child support and custody system is doing the exact same thing, just with a different coat of paint. He argues that today's grade schoolers are essentially taught the same snitch ethos.
They're conditioned.
Right. They're culturally conditioned to rely on the state, and mothers are encouraged to dial 911 if dad misses a child support payment, essentially using armed police as a private collection agency.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Riker is introducing two highly provocative concepts here. He calls them bastardomics and the gynocratic welfare loop.
Bastardomics. That is quite the term. Walk me through the mechanics of that.
Bastardomics is his term for an economic system that thrives on fatherlessness. It is a system where taxpayers heavily subsidize government-run daycare centers to raise children, while simultaneously the family courts are milking the working fathers for 25 to 50% of their gross paychecks to fund a single-mother household.
So the state just replaces the dad.
Exactly. The state becomes the surrogate father.
Then in the gynocratic welfare loop.
The gynocratic welfare loop is the cyclical, self-sustaining process of this entire system. Step 1. The state creates legal and financial incentives to break families apart, like no-fault divorce and guaranteed alimony.
Okay, got it.
Step 2. It inflates subsidies and social safety nets, specifically targeted at single mothers. And Step 3. It unleashes state-sponsored legal bounty hunters like wage garnishments, license suspensions, jail time on the displaced fathers to extract the wealth necessary to fund the next round of the cycle.
And he paints these absolutely devastating portraits of men caught in this loop. There is the story of John, a mechanic in San Diego. The guy works hard, pays his taxes, then COVID hits, and like millions of others, he loses his job.
An incredibly common story.
Right. But the judge, in his custody case, doesn't care about a global pandemic. The judge demands 50% of his $1,200 a month unemployment checks. Because he literally needs to buy food to survive, he falls $3,000 behind on his payments. And what happens? The cops literally surround him and arrest him at a Denny's.
And the visual contrast Riker provides there is very intentional.
Right. Because while John is getting handcuffed over $3,000 at a diner, his ex-wife is posting Instagram stories drinking cocktails from a cabana at the Bellagio pool in Vegas.
It's maddening.
And when John's lawyer brings this up to the court, pointing out the utter absurdity of jailing an unemployed man while the recipient is vacationing, the court's response is, quote, "The non-custodial parent's lifestyle isn't our jurisdiction."
It perfectly encapsulates Riker's point that the system is entirely blind to the reality of the father's struggle. The court views him strictly as a debtor to the state, just an entry on a ledger.
It's incredibly dehumanizing.
He brings up another harrowing case of a Florida roofer. This guy is working 60-hour weeks in the sweltering heat. His ex-wife exploits a jurisdictional custody loophole and takes their kids 9,000 miles away to New Zealand.
New Zealand, that's literally the other side of the planet.
Right. And the judge tells the father, who now has zero access to his children, that he still has to pay $2,300 a month or face immediate jail time for contempt.
That is insane.
So now this guy is driving a forklift in Auckland, bleeding cash just to stay out of a cage, treated like a human ATM for a family he isn't even allowed to see.
And the tragic part of all this is that Riker shows it absolutely doesn't have to be this way. He points to alternative models that actually work, specifically Alaska.
Yes, the Alaska model.
In 2017, Alaska switched their legal default to a 50-50 shared physical custody arrangement. Unless someone was proven unfit, the starting point was equal time.
Which is how most people assume it works anyway, but it doesn't.
Exactly. And the results? Child support cases plummeted by 60%. Because when parents share time equally, those massive financial transfers just disappear. But not only that, kids' grades went up, juvenile crime dropped, and dads actually stuck around because they weren't being legally treated like weekend visitors in their kids' lives.
But Riker cynically notes that other states adamantly refuse to follow Alaska's lead.
Let me guess. Because of the money.
Because of the money. Too many divorce lawyers, state bureaucrats, and well-funded NGOs rely on the $35 billion a year child support industry. If 50-50 custody became the national default, the Title IV VD money would dry up overnight.
So let me ask you, looking at how he frames this, how does the author view the difference between a true deadbeat dad, the cultural stereotype of the guy who just abandons his kids to go drink at the bar and refuses to work, and the men he says are being bankrupted by this system?
It's a great question.
Does he make a distinction, or is he just, defending all absent fathers?
He absolutely makes a distinction, but his conclusion flips the script entirely. Riker argues that the cultural image of the malicious deadbeat dad is largely a myth.
A myth?
Yes. He claims it is a propaganda archetype manufactured specifically to justify the existence of the Title IV VD extraction machine. To prove this, he cites a comprehensive 2022 Urban Institute study showing that 43% of the fathers currently jailed for being deadbeats actually earned under $20,000 a year total prior to their incarceration.
So they weren't hiding millions in offshore accounts, they were just broke.
Exactly. His conclusion is that deadbeat dads are usually just economically disadvantaged men trapped in a system that literally monetizes their failure.
Wow.
They aren't unwilling to father their children. They are financially incapable of meeting the state's artificially inflated demands. And those demands are often imputed based on what the court thinks they should earn, not what they actually earn. And then they are criminalized and jailed for their poverty.
It is an incredibly bleak picture of the legal system. Which naturally leads to the next logical question, right? If the courts are this financially incentivized to penalize fathers, as Riker claims, you have to ask yourself, why isn't there mass outrage?
Right? Why isn't anyone marching?
Exactly. Half the population should be rioting in the streets. If men are being ground to dust, why are they accepting it? And that brings us to the cultural mechanics of his argument. Riker points the finger squarely at pop culture, media propaganda, and big tech censorship.
Riker argues that you cannot legally and financially subjugate half the population without first subjugating them culturally. You have to make the public believe they deserve it.
That makes a dark sort of sense.
He details what he calls Hollywood's multi-decade campaign of matriarchal propaganda. He brings the receipts. He references a fascinating, in-depth UCLA study that meticulously tracked the portrayal of sitcom fathers from 1950 all the way to 2010.
The results of that study are wild.
They really are. The researchers found that post-1990, the average implied IQ of the sitcom dad plummeted by 12 points.
We're talking about the evolution from the wise, respected father figures of the 1950s, the father knows best era, to the bumbling, incompetent idiots of the 90s and 2000s. We're talking about Tim Taylor blowing things up and grunting on home improvement, Homer Simpson drooling over donuts and strangling his son, Al Bundy just complaining about his life and avoiding his family.
Exactly. And Riker argues this shift wasn't just accidental comedy or a natural evolution of writing styles. He views it as a coordinated cultural effort to normalize male incompetence.
That was intentional.
Yes. By consistently making fathers the punchline, society is psychologically conditioned to view them as secondary, non-essential, and frankly, dangerous parents. This perfectly primes the culture to passively accept family courts, treating them as exactly that.
While the moms are elevated.
Right. Conversely, mothers in these same shows are portrayed as hyper-competent, the long-suffering voices of reason, and the true gatekeepers of the family.
And then he zeroes in on one specific movie that I never in a million years would have expected to see in a book like this, Mrs. Doubtfire. The beloved Robin Williams classic. I always just thought of it as a funny, heartwarming movie about a guy who desperately misses his kids and goes to crazy lengths to see them. But Riker analyzes it like it's a piece of psychological warfare.
He does. And his analysis forces you to watch the film in a completely different light. He argues that Mrs. Doubtfire normalized an incredibly toxic cultural idea.
Which is?
That a father must literally trick the courts, suppress his masculinity, and disguise himself as a woman just to be deemed safe enough to be allowed near his own children.
Wow, when you put it like that.
He points out the glaring subtextual symbolism. The movie teaches the audience that raw masculinity is dangerous, unstable, and chaotic, but femininity, even artificial femininity, is safe, nurturing, and trustworthy.
And this isn't just abstract film theory for Riker. He points out the real-world legal impact of this cultural conditioning. He details an actual documented custody case in Ohio where a judge explicitly quoted Mrs. Doubtfire from the bench while stripping a father of his parental rights.
That is just incredible.
The judge literally told the man, quote, "Children need stability, not a stand-up comedian." A Hollywood script literally became legal precedent to take a man's kids away.
This cultural conditioning doesn't stop at television and film, though. It extends aggressively into the digital age, which Riker dubs the digital gynocracy.
The digital gynocracy.
He argues that the misandry industry, the industry of male hatred and suppression, is actively protected by big tech monopolies. He points to leaked 2020 Twitter documents showing that moderation teams applied hate speech policies completely inconsistently.
How so?
They fiercely protected female victimhood, while simultaneously allowing hashtags like male tears to trend globally without any restriction.
He also cites a staggering 2021 Stanford Law Review study. They found that 87% of social media posts detailing male domestic abuse got deleted by moderators for violating community standards. 87%.
It's algorithmic bias.
Compared to just 12% of posts being deleted when women were the victims. It is the active, algorithmic erasure of male suffering. If a man speaks up about being abused, the algorithm literally deletes his voice.
And because of this suppression, Riker claims we are currently seeing a massive cultural backlash. Men realize the game is rigged, so they are voting with their wallets and their attention spans.
They're just opting out.
Right. He contrasts the recent box office failure of The Matrix Resurrections, which grossed a paltry $157 million, with the original Matrix, which grossed $465 million.
Why did it fail so badly, according to him?
He argues audiences flat out rejected the reboot's modernized, sniveling hero who cries in group therapy and questions his reality. Because deep down, men naturally crave stoic conquerors, not vulnerable consultants. They want Neo the savior, not Neo the therapy patient.
He calls this massive cultural shift the Rogan effect. The data shows that 42% of Spotify's top 100 podcasts are now hosted by men who actively reject DEI structures, corporate media talking points, and woke ideology.
They're flocking to alternatives.
Yeah, he highlights this one particular guy, an independent creator known as Joe from Boise. He's an ex-Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan who just spends Tuesday nights screaming into a $40 USB microphone in his messy garage about how the VA lost his x-rays and how the system is broken.
Just raw authenticity.
Exactly. And this guy is pulling more cultural weight, generating more engagement, and getting more downloads than CNN's entire primetime multi-million-dollar lineup.
Because, as Riker notes, Men are starving for authentic, unapologetic masculinity. They want voices that sound real, voices that are angry, voices that don't sound like they've been sanitized by HR-mandated sensitivity training.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To prove exactly how desperate men are for raw, unfiltered rage over corporate media polish, Riker talks about a bizarre experiment he conducted himself.
Oh, the raccoon?
Yes, he literally taped his neighbor's meth-fueled aggressive raccoon screaming and trashing a garbage can. He took the audio, named the raccoon Critical Theory, put it near a mic, and played the screaming sounds on his podcast whenever he brought up Karl Marx or family court.
It's an absurd, highly inflammatory stunt.
Totally absurd. But what was the outcome? He got 50,000 downloads in 7 days.
That is hilarious.
He proved, in his mind, that guys would literally rather listen to an angry, screeching animal than endure another sanitized NPR think piece lecturing them on toxic masculinity. It proves there's a massive, highly motivated, underserved market of men who feel completely alienated by mainstream media.
Which brings us perfectly to the core of Riker's prescriptive advice. We've laid out the diagnosis. If the legal system is a financial trap, and the media matrix is designed to algorithmically mock and suppress you, how does a man actually survive and thrive?
Right. What's the playbook?
How does he navigate the dating market without destroying himself?
Because men still want relationships, right? They still want connection. But Riker says you have to rely on cold, hard evolutionary biology. His baseline philosophy here is incredibly blunt. Biology doesn't care about your feelings.
He's very firm on that.
He completely dismisses modern feminist theories of gender being a social construct, and instead relies on thousands of years of evolutionary psychology.
He argues that for 200,000 years of human evolution, men and women developed specific complementary mating strategies designed for survival in harsh environments.
Okay, so what are those strategies?
Women biologically seek competent providers and protectors, men who demonstrate stoic leadership and emotional control. Therefore, men who show vulnerability, who cry, who complain, instead of projecting stoic leadership, do not endear themselves to women. Instead, Riker claims, they trigger female hypergamy.
I want to make sure the audience understands that term because it's a huge buzzword in the manosphere. Hypergamy being the biological drive for a woman to constantly seek a mate of higher status or greater resources.
Correct.
So if a man acts weak or vulnerable, her ancient biology tells her he can't protect her, so she needs to look for a stronger man.
Exactly. And because of this, he frames the entire modern marriage therapy industry as a dangerous scam designed to make men weak and trigger that exact hypergamy.
He really goes after therapists.
Oh yeah. He tells an infuriating story of a female divorce mediator charging $400 an hour to lecture a completely shell-shocked husband about his lack of emotional generosity.
Emotional generosity.
Right. In the end, the husband is so beaten down by the psychobabble that he signs away his entire retirement account and his boat, and the mediator actually bills him for the Kleenex he used while crying in her office.
You have to be kidding me. Billed for the Kleenex.
Riker's point is that asking men to shed their competitive edge, to cry, and to swap logic for limp emotional concessions doesn't save marriages. It just bankrupts men while making their wives dry up with contempt.
And he backs this biological argument up with what he calls the 23-31 rule. This is going to be highly controversial for some listeners, but Riker points directly to CDC and demographic fertility data.
The math of dating, basically.
Yeah. He says female fertility and biological desirability peak at age 23, but female demands and entitlement peak at 31. Because of this, he heavily critiques what he calls the career-first delusion that society relentlessly sells to young women.
He uses a devastating example of a woman named Jessica, a 38-year-old high-powered corporate lawyer. She drank the corporate feminist Kool-Aid, froze her eggs at 34, and prioritized making partner at her firm.
Which is what everyone tells you to do.
Right, but when she finally went to use those eggs at 38, all 12 frozen eggs failed to fertilize. Now she is suing the fertility clinic for emotional damages while desperately trying to date men much older than her.
It's a sad situation.
It is. Riker contrasts this tragedy with the biological reality of men, pointing out the stark asymmetry. Men can still naturally father children at 70, giving them vintage status and increasing value as they accumulate resources, while women face a strict, unforgiving biological expiration date.
So what is the solution for men navigating this minefield? The ultimate red pill truth he pushes is what he calls stoicism 2.0. To survive this landscape, men must undergo a brutal dopamine divorce.
It is a radical, almost monastic rejection of modern digital comforts.
What does that entail?
He advocates for deleting TikTok, quitting porn entirely, taking ice baths to build physical resilience, waking up at 4 a.m. and reading Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. He argues that screen-saturated, dopamine-addicted men become weak, compliant beta providers.
He has data on that too, doesn't he?
He cites a terrifying 2023 Pew study finding that males who spend over 4 hours daily on social media had a 63% higher divorce rate than men who didn't.
Wow. He talks about a tech CEO he personally coached. The guy's marriage was crumbling, they were sleeping in separate rooms. Riker had him swap Netflix for Nietzsche, start doing grueling sunrise jujitsu with his sons, and crucially stop communicating his feelings to his wife.
Just total silence.
And the result? The CEO saved his marriage entirely through silent, stoic leadership. His wife saw him as a rock again and looked at him like a newlywed.
That is the personal side. But Riker also introduces a brutal economic calculation for single men, which he calls the hedonic treadmill index and the 3 escort rule.
Okay, this part of the book is wild. I need you to walk through the math on this because it sounds completely insane until you look at his spreadsheet. How is he actually calculating this?
This is undoubtedly his most shocking and clinical economic argument. He argues that men should mathematically calculate the hourly rate of high-end transactional companionship like escorts or sugar babies, and compare it against the lifetime cost of alimony and divorce asset loss.
Let me break that math down based on his examples. He says, look, if you get married, get divorced, and have to pay $50,000 a year in alimony for 20 years, plus lose half your assets, say a $500,000 house, you are out $1.5 million, period.
All right. And Riker's 3 escort rule calculates the cost of hiring high-end transactional intimacy 3 times a week over that exact same 20-year period.
Okay.
He factors in the complete lack of legal liability, the zero risk of losing your house, and the absence of family court fees, and compares the return on investment. His conclusion is that treating physical intimacy like a ruthless business expense is mathematically and financially safer than signing a marriage contract with the state of California.
But let me push back on this for a second, because I want to get your analytical take on the human element here. The author advocates for men to be these unfeeling, stoic rocks, to view all human relationships as either transactional math problems or primitive power dynamics based on evolutionary biology.
It's a very bleak worldview.
Does the book address the immense psychological toll that kind of isolation takes on a person? Or is that just the price of admission for this brand of masculinity? Because honestly, it sounds incredibly lonely.
It is a vital question. Riker would likely argue that what you call isolation, you call sovereignty. He doesn't view stoicism as unfeeling or sociopathic. He views it as absolute emotional discipline.
So he thinks it's a strength.
Exactly. He would argue that the psychological toll of being bankrupted in family court, losing access to your own flesh and blood children, and being culturally mocked by the media is far more devastating and lonely than the discipline required to stand completely alone.
I mean, when you put it like that.
For Riker, the isolation is a necessary detox from a sick system that feeds on male dependence. He believes that true brotherhood among men and genuine biologically driven respect from women only come after a man has proven he doesn't need them to survive.
Which perfectly sets up the final macro-level consequence of all this. If millions of men read this book, accept Riker's premise, and adopt Stoicism 2.0, what happens to society at large? Because according to the author, men aren't just reading about this on Substack, they are acting on it en masse right now.
They are. Riker points to a massive demographic shift that he characterizes as a global jailbreak from the institution of marriage.
A jailbreak.
The statistics he provides are sobering for anyone invested in the continuation of traditional societal structures or, frankly, the tax base. In heavy MGTOW states, men going their own way, there is a reported 72% drop in wedding rates over the last decade. Men are simply refusing to sign the contract.
And it is not just an American phenomenon. He looks globally to prove this is a biologically driven reaction to state overreach.
It's happening everywhere.
He points to China, where by 2030, an estimated 30 million men will face permanent bachelorhood. They call them the bare branches. In Japan, the fertility rate has plummeted to a catastrophic 1.3. And Riker characterizes this not as an economic accident or a quirk of modern life, but as a deliberate, silent male sex strike against becoming debtors to the state.
Because of this strike, the book essentially operates as a tactical escape manual for men who want to opt out while retaining their wealth.
What kind of tactics are we talking about?
Riker details the highly sophisticated tactics savvy men are using to rewrite the rules of the game. We are talking about Wall Street hedge funds actually packaging bachelor bonds.
Wait, bachelor bonds?
Yes. Financial instruments that pay out a higher yield if a man successfully avoids marriage and the associated wealth destruction.
That is next level finance. We are talking about guys using offshore Bahamian trusts and complex LLCs to shield cryptocurrency from family court alimony calculations.
The crypto angle is huge for this movement.
He tells an incredible story of a San Diego surfer turned crypto bro who shielded $2.3 million in Bitcoin by routing it through the Bahamas. The family court couldn't touch it.
Right, because it's completely decentralized.
So his court-ordered alimony is based on his on-paper income, which is basically zero. He pays $12 a month. His ex-wife thinks he's completely bankrupt, while he is currently driving a leased Lamborghini and living in Dubai.
He also discusses smaller guerrilla tactics. Guys using $15 eBay signal blockers to disable ring cameras so their estranged wives can't track their movements during custody battles.
Just everyday sabotage.
Exactly. He even details fathers hopping freight ships to Tokyo because Japan doesn't extradite fathers in international custody disputes.
And Riker contextualizes this modern rebellion with a fascinating piece of historical precedent. He brings up the 1950s in Sweden.
Yes, the Swedish bachelor tax.
Tell me about that.
The Swedish government, terrified of falling birth rates, trying to implement a punitive bachelor tax to financially force men into marriage.
Like a literal tax for being single.
Yes. In response, Swedish men waged a massive coordinated marriage strike. They simply refused to marry. They crashed wedding rates by 42%, endured the financial penalties, and completely waited out the lawmakers.
And did it work?
It did. By 1969, the state caved, scrapped the tax, and loosened the laws. Riker is arguing that collective male action, a stubborn refusal to fund their own demise, is historically proven to work against the state.
And some of the legal workarounds men are finding today to execute this strike are just mind-bending. There is a Montana diesel mechanic in the book who realized the custody courts were heavily rigged in favor of mothers.
So what did he do?
Before he even filed for divorce, he legally adopted his own kids, getting his wife to sign the complex paperwork without her realizing the full legal implication of relinquishing her primary parental status.
Wow.
When the divorce happened, the judge tried to call it fraud, but the paperwork was ironclad and legally binding. Custody secured.
Conversely, he highlights the absolute horror stories that drive men to these extremes in the first place.
Like what?
A Florida man who discovered through routine DNA testing that the twins he raised, loved, and provided for over 8 years weren't biologically his. His wife had an affair.
Oh, man.
And the court's response to this massive paternity fraud: you're still dad on paper. He is now legally forced to pay $3,000 a month to fund another man's biological children.
That is just evil.
It is cases like this that Riker says push men to abandon the system entirely and look toward extreme technological solutions.
Yeah, let's talk about the tech, because this is where the book goes full sci-fi reality, and it is fascinating. He talks about Silicon Valley biotech companies, like one called Manchild Inc., raising $2 billion for CRISPR artificial wombs.
It sounds like science fiction, but the funding is real.
The explicit stated goal of this technology is to allow men to have biological children entirely bypassing women and the family court industrial complex. He cites a 2024 Pew study showing that an astonishing 79% of childless men under 40 would use this tech to avoid the financial and legal risks of modern family law.
This raises an important question, perhaps the most important geopolitical question of the entire deep dive.
What's that?
If Western men retreat to crypto mines and abandon chapels, if they rely on artificial wombs to propagate their genetics, if Shinto priests in Japan are literally consecrating anime body pillows because men prefer the safety of polyester to the risk of human relationships, who actually builds the future?
That's a great point.
If this global marriage strike is completely successful, does human civilization just slowly grind to a halt?
So, what does this all mean? Summarizing Conrad Riker's ultimate thesis, he is saying that the current institutional system is so deeply corrupted by feminist and Marxist principles, so perfectly designed to extract male labor, wealth, and dignity, that the only winning move is not to play.
Right, just walk away.
Men must dismantle the system by refusing to participate in it on the state's terms. They must go galt, taking their resources, their stoic leadership, and their genetic legacy out of the traditional market entirely until the system collapses under its own weight and society is forced to renegotiate the terms of the social contract.
It is a radical, uncompromising thesis of intentional destruction as a prerequisite for rebuilding.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. From the origins of no-fault divorce as a sneaky state tax grab to the federal kickbacks of Title 4D driving the custody courts and criminalizing fathers.
It's a lot to process.
We explored how the media matrix allegedly conditions society to mock and diminish fathers, and how Riker believes evolutionary biology and stoicism 2.0 are the only viable ways for a man to protect himself. And finally, we looked at the financial, legal, and technological strategies men are using to execute a global marriage strike.
Right.
Whether you agree with Conrad Riker or think he is completely out of his mind, you cannot deny that these ideas fundamentally challenge and reframe how we understand the basic institutions of our society.
I want to leave the listener with one final provocative thought to ponder, building on that technological escape route we just discussed.
Go for it.
The book advocates heavily for men to use technology, crypto, and even artificial wombs to achieve total sovereignty and escape female-dominated systems. But we must ask ourselves, if men successfully sever themselves completely from the biological need for women and the structure of the state, does this ultimate liberation actually lead to the total atomization and extinction of human connection?
That's the real fear.
By removing all risk, all vulnerability, and all interdependence, are we engineering our own obsolescence in the name of absolute freedom? It is a chilling prospect.
It really is. A cure that might be worse than the disease.
Listen, if this deep dive got your gears turning, do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the show. We tackle massive, controversial topics like this all the time.
Definitely.
And if you want to read the raw source material for yourself and see exactly how Conrad Riker lays out this war manual, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now and buy Dismantling the Matrimonial Trap. And be sure to follow him directly on Substack at Conrad N. Riker. Thank you for diving deep with us today. We will see you on the next one.